Hello and welcome to Conversations from the A&F podcast. In this episode, we speak to Petra, and she shares her story of being assessed as a prospective adoptive parent. Her first assessment through a local authority was entered before panel, and she shares that experience, its impact, and the experience of her ultimately successful approval through a voluntary adoption agency. Petra's experience is not unique, and many applicants struggle in the assessment process. In this podcast, she reflects on the impact on her and the limitations and pitfalls of that process. As always, if you have experience of adoption, fostering, or special guardianship from any perspective, personal or professional, and would like to share that on the podcast, please get in touch through the Facebook or Twitter page, or you can email us at a&fpodcast@gmail.com.
I'm Petra, and I am currently in introductions with my future son, my son. Do I have to call him my future son or my son? I don't know. But anyway, he's there. But yeah, I really have been keen to tell my story about rejection because this is my second attempt at adopting. I guess my adoption journey started a long time ago when I decided to foster as sort of a trial run. But because I'm single and have to work, I was told that I could only do short breaks. So I got approved as a foster carer, short breaks foster carer with my local authority. Been doing that for a long time, for about 4 years. So when I decided that, okay, what am I waiting for? I just need to, jump in and adopt. I just bought my own house, got a stable job, built up a brilliant support network. So I felt the time was right. And that was January 2019. So of course, the obvious first step was to go to the local authority that I was fostering with. Yeah, no brainer, right? So I applied with them. Didn't really look around at anyone else, just applied with them. I knew it was a different team and I'd have to start from scratch, but I figured there had to be some, continuity in that. So when we started, obviously, lockdown had just happened. The national consciousness was a little bit on the stressed side, a little bit anxious. And before even starting stage one, they asked me straight away to do a financial report. I think because I'm single.
Yeah.
Which threw me because I'm like, well, I knew I'd have to do one, but expected it to be a lot later on. So I didn't know anything about benefits and benefit calculators, anything like that. So I was on the Facebook groups trying to figure out how do I do this? I also have dyscalculia, which is a numerical form of neurodiversity. I have dyslexia and dyscalculia. So that kind of didn't help. But I managed to cobble something together and I sent it to the social worker and I'm like, okay, here it is. Don't know how accurate it is, but I've done my best. She comes back to me and says, well, can you try it again and make it more accurate? I'm like, oh. I have a disability here. I'm on my own, isolated. I have nobody I can go to ask for help. If you will accept this as it is, and then as soon as things open up again, we laugh now, I can go and get some help to do it properly. Thought nothing more of it. Did get some help, got it done in stage one, not a problem. Did my prep training and there was only me and one other couple.
The prep training online. Was that all online? Yeah. And how did you find that?
Yeah. It was a bit strange. And I initially I was like, I did it quite late in stage one because I was like, I'd prefer to do it face to face. And obviously we didn't know it was going to be 2 years.
Yeah.
So in the end, I'm like, okay, I'll do it online. Obviously a lot of it was covering stuff I'd already done in my fostering training as well. And there was only one other couple. So it was quite small and, it was quite friendly. There was like 4 of us on Zoom, 2 trainers, me and this other couple. But the other couple kept going on about, oh, our social worker said this, our social worker said that, our social worker said the other. And I'm like, I've not heard from my social worker. I
Right.
now know that's quite common in stage 1, but I didn't then.
Yeah.
And so I said to the trainer, and they were like, do you want us to talk to, pass that along, say you'd like some more contact? I'm like, well, yes, if that's what the norm is.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I didn't think anything more of that. Got through to stage 2. And bearing in mind, this is still sort of mid-lockdown, the social worker insisted on face-to-face. And again, at that stage of the adoption process, you're like, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, 3 bags full, man, because you just want to get approved. So I'm like, okay, come on in. Nobody else has been in my house. It'd be nice to have some company. And the first session went fine. The second one, I noticed she seemed to be deliberately almost misunderstanding what I was saying.
Right.
So I'd had no sort of preparations or anything about what sort of questions they'd be asking or anything like that. And as you know, they're quite in depth, and because of being neurodiverse, I have slow processing speed. So it takes me a little time to think, but I also at that point believe, now I know myself to be ADHD, which means even though I've not processed it, I say stuff and then go, no, that's not what I meant. I meant this. So I was backtracking a bit, and she seemed to be like really picking up on that, and twisting things. And I really got the sense that she had something against me. Now, I disclosed all of my neurodiversity in the ROI. That's right, isn't it? ROI, Register of Interest thing.
Yeah.
Including, I put that I believe myself to have ADHD, but I don't have a diagnosis.
Yeah.
So the neurodiversity, particularly the ADHD, was something the social worker really kind of picked up on. And I not only am I neurodiverse, but I also work professionally as a coping strategy trainer, training people with neurodiversity in the workplace on strategies to deal with that, as well as software. And so, I'm like, yes, I have this strategy, I have that strategy. And, she seemed to be, some of my strategies, she was sort of almost interpreting as a sign of anxiety.
Right.
So, I was at that point, I decided that I would buy a little bit extra of non-perishables so that I would have a stockpile, if you like, ready for when I'm on adoption leave, to reduce costs then, because obviously a statutory adoption pay is not huge. So as well as saving, I was, and she kind of was interpreting that as panic buying in a way.
Right.
And was, she kept going back to this anxiety and maths anxiety and social, and I'm like, literally one of the examples she expressed with maths anxiety was that I would be too stressed and wouldn't be able to manage the children's lunch money at school. It was like really small things like that. So I didn't feel it was going well, but the sessions continued.
I mean, that must be really, because people invest an awful lot into even getting to the start line of adoption. And as you mentioned, the power dynamic is very much that if they say jump, you say how high,
and don't come down till they say so.
Yeah, and so it must have been really difficult to sort of in slow motions feel like it's going off the rails, or
and of course that in itself is anxiety inducing, which is confirming what she thought about me anyway. And my attempt because she was asking me, how does neurodiversity affect you, and and what are your strategies? And she kept asking these things, and so I'm telling her, and repeatedly to the point where I'm writing a table of these are the standard traits. This is what I have. This is what I don't have. Of the ones I have, this is how the strategies I've got in place, and this is how it would benefit me as an adoptive parent. I guess, maybe I almost became quite desperate in my kind of, this is not an issue.
Yeah.
So the inevitable happened on it was quite late. And I noticed that she hadn't mentioned panel dates or anything like that, which by this point I'd completely connected in with the adoption community, going to the prospective adopter meetings with Adoption UK and things like that. So it was a little bit sus that I hadn't been given any date for panel or anything like that. And then she sat down here and I knew what was coming. But yeah, she said, I have decided I cannot recommend you at panel.
Right.
And yeah, my world imploded at that point, because I always say it's kind of like and I don't want to belittle anybody else's experience, but it's what I would imagine is like the adoption equivalent of a miscarriage. I'd got so far.
Yeah.
I was waiting for a panel date and she's like, no, not going to happen. So she said we'd arrange a meeting with her manager to discuss it. And she was going to send me a list of the things she considered to be my vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
She sent me that list, and believe me, some of them were just laughable. For example, the most laughable one, which her manager even laughed at, was she has a low mood. Her mood goes low once a month. This needs further exploration. I'm a woman of a childbearing age. Enough explanation.
Yeah.
And it was just things like that. So we had a meeting with the manager, and I'd spoken to Claire at Adoption UK, who was amazing, and I thoroughly recommend any prospective adopters listening, join the Adoption UK Zooms, because they are amazing. And Claire kind of talked me down and was like, look, this is not the end, go to the meeting, do this. And she said, I bet you a bar of chocolate, because neither of us drink alcohol, that the vast majority of these things the manager will just discount.
Yeah.
And sure enough, at the meeting, it came down to the undiagnosed ADHD. And they said they would need to speak to their medical advisor about it. So we would wait for that response and come back later. We met again, and the agency medical advisor had apparently agreed with them that, I needed to withdraw from the process until I could get a formal diagnosis.
Right.
And I'm like, well, what difference will a piece of paper make? It won't make a difference to any of the traits that I've already been very open about, or my strategies to deal with them. And so that was that. Door closed, really.
It sounds like a glib question, but that sounds, this is in the midst of the pandemic and all of the associated challenges everyone's facing. How do you pick yourself up from that?
Not easily. I reached out. I spoke to my family. My sister surprised me at how supportive she was through it. Shouldn't have surprised me. She's amazing, but she was really supportive. And obviously Claire and the rest of the Adoption UK community, Home for Good as well. As a Christian, I'm involved with Home for Good. And the thing that came out of all that, and that everybody was telling me, was, and that's why I wanted to share my story here, is because the most important thing I heard then was, you're not alone. That so many prospective adopters are turned down first time, and
Mm.
that can hinge on one social worker, or whether that's a preconception or a prejudice or a professional opinion, and I have known other people since then that it's happened to. I hadn't experienced it happening to anyone at that time, but since I have, and I know that my story has really encouraged them.
Right.
And what I was encouraged to do at the time was to look around at other agencies, and to ask other agencies. And so before that second meeting with the social worker, I'd phoned 2 local voluntary agencies, and I'd been completely open and said, look, it's coming down to this, the ADHD. Would that be a problem for you? One of them said, no, it wouldn't be a problem.
Yeah.
The other one said, no, but I will check with the medical advisor and get back to you. And so I went with them because they'd done that extra check. So almost as soon as I had sent that letter that I had to send to say I was withdrawing from the process with the local authority, I signed up for an information event with Adoption Focus. And they came back to me and said, no, not a problem. I had to start from the beginning. And, I was a year into it by this point. But I had to start literally from the information event before they'd even, send out the registration of interest form.
Was that a little bit, that must have been frustrating, or did it feel like a very different event? Comparing the two, was there differences?
Well, the information event initial one was face-to-face and this was online. But a lot of it was sort of repeated stuff that I've seen. But it does also, the information events, as you know, they give you an idea of the personality, if you like, of the agency, a feel for the agency. So at this point I was like, I'm just going to, it's got to be done. So I'm going to do it because one thing that rejection had sealed in me was my determination to be a mum. So, and there was a little bit of a thing in stage 1 with references from overseas because I've spent a lot of time working and living overseas. They wanted a reference from Mexico, or a police check from Mexico, because I'd been there 6 months. And it soon became apparent that would involve either me flying to Mexico City in the middle of a pandemic to present myself, or going to the embassy in London, which was also closed because of the pandemic, and then paying a solicitor in Mexico City to go and get the police check. So, of course, that was slightly triggering. I'm like, I'm just going to fall at the first hurdle here. But I was simultaneously impressed that they were doing more in-depth checks than the local authority had at this point. So I was like, nah.
That is interesting, isn't it?
So thankfully, their legal team, and again, it was that friendliness. Every time I phoned up, they were like, "Oh, okay, well, let's." They were wanting to help. And the legal team said, "Yeah, okay, fair enough. I could provide them with a reference from my leader who I worked with at the time there, and that, that satisfied them." And then, straight through to stage 2, and my social worker Jane was absolutely lovely.
It must have been quite a moment to kind of get that sort of green light to go to stage 2, having sort of fallen at that hurdle or not got past that gate.
Well, that's where the anxiety came, because I'd got through stage 1 before.
Right.
It's like stage 1 was not where the problem was. And so it was once stage 2 started. But Jane had obviously done her homework, and she knew what my first experience had been. And she was
Right.
so empathetic about that. And she's like, if, reassuring, if you've got any questions, if you feel things are not going right, just let me know. And the other main difference was in stage 1, I was given a home reflections book, which had all of the questions in. So I had a chance to process, and I had a chance to think about my answers and, be clear about my answers. So this time in stage 2, we were going through stuff I'd already written and already processed. So it was a lot easier in that respect. And it gave a lot truer answer, from before. And yeah, she was like, at every point, there was one point when she needed to do it virtually rather than face to face. And she's like, this isn't because there's a problem, and then on the day where we got to the exact session where it all gone pear-shaped the first time, I said that to her, and I trusted her at this point. I said, look, I want you to know that this is the session where I was told I wasn't going any further. So I need you to tell me, do you have any concerns about me as an adopter? And she said to me, my only concern genuinely is that I've missed something, because I don't see any reason. And at that point, I felt confident enough to show her the list that the first social worker had given me. She looked at it, she read it, she looked at me and said, that's character assassination. And for her to, and to have that such an affirmation, of this is not you, and this isn't the you that I see, was just huge for me. Really affirming that this could happen this time.
Yeah.
And I had a panel date by that point as well that we were working towards. But then, even then, day of the panel comes round, and I take the call from the chair of panel, all good, and then I just broke down. I had a bit of a meltdown, like I say,
not unreasonably.
No. And like I say, as a Christian, obviously that came out in me in prayer, and I was just like, okay, God, even at this point, if you do not want this to happen, then I will accept a no. But I don't want a no. And I felt almost like I was grieving my chance to be a parent before it was taken from me. So I went to panel, and I read my part before panel just to remind myself of what they knew about me. And also it was so positive, it was an encouragement. And then they asked me a question. I can't remember the exact question, but they asked me a question about the vulnerabilities. My social worker later told me that she froze at that point because she knew that was was a trigger for me. But I just read what she had written as my vulnerabilities, which were being single. It all came down to being single, but mitigated by, but she has a strong support network. She has, all of this kind of stuff. She has the financial stability. She's got all the training and experience and all that kind of stuff. So, so I just kind of went, well, obviously I'm a single person, and, but I've got, the support network of my church, my family, my, community. I've already engaged with the adoption community and all that kind of stuff. So then, of course, as happens virtually, the meeting ends and you just wait for the phone call from your social worker.
It's a pretty brutal process, isn't it, going to panel? There's no way of getting around it, really. It is people making life-altering decisions. I mean, I know it's a recommendation, the panel makes a recommendation, but it does feel very much like they are making the decision.
They're deciding whether you can be a parent or not. Yeah. And when you're doing it virtually as well, and you're on your own, it's just like me and the cat here and waiting for the phone call. At least when, it's faced in-person panels, you're sat with the social worker or, or if you've got a partner, you're with your partner. So, so I'm just sat here kind of waiting for the phone to ring, which was probably only about 10 minutes, but it was probably only about 10 minutes.
Long
but
10
it
minutes.
Seemed a lot longer. Although I will say, I tell you what was a long wait, because, they let the social worker in first and they grill the social worker, and they say that's, usually about 10 minutes. Half an hour, I was still waiting to be let in.
Yeah, that's brutal.
So, and I'm like, okay, this is going pear-shaped, because why are they grilling the social worker for this long? So when she phoned me and she was like, right, straight away, unanimous yes, you're approved.
Wow.
But she said, but I'd want to also tell you what their comments were. Right. And so she was telling me, about how they, what they saw as my strengths and why I would, they were overwhelmingly kind of thinking I would be a great parent. And you know what? Never came up in panel. ADHD. Neurodiversity. Never came up. Wasn't even mentioned. She then said that the 20, half an hour that I was waiting, they were trying to get their heads around why I'd been refused first time. They were grilling her to try and find out why I'd been there now, because obviously that had been mentioned in the report. And she was like, I don't know, because it didn't make sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a panel. I mean, obviously, I'm a social worker, and having written reports for panels, that sometimes it's incredibly actually getting people onto black and white, in writing is really difficult. And when there's these questions that can't be answered, that panels don't like answers. No. They don't mind difficult questions as long as there's an answer.
Yeah.
But that must have been frustrating for you as well, because really, you don't have an answer for that, do you?
Yeah. So, that was then approval. And then, I mean, it did come up again, obviously, with matching. Because...
So can you tell me a little bit about matching then? Because when were you approved?
I was approved in September last year.
Right.
So straight on Link Maker, where there weren't many children and lots of adopters at that point.
Because one of the criticisms I've heard of the matching process is that some people don't get straight onto Link Maker. Mm-hmm. So was that just an agency sort of policy that people go straight on?
Yeah. And I think from what I understand, it's usually agencies will, voluntary agencies will go straight onto Link Maker. Local authorities try and match you internally before. But I was straight on. Actually went on holiday just afterwards. So I didn't actually log in to Link Maker until, I think I set up the account, but I didn't actually go in and do a profile or anything until after a holiday, because a lot of people had been saying, don't take a break.
Yeah.
Digest the fact that you're approved before you delve into that. So, and then, you're faced with this, Amazon of children, this online shopping of children,
which is
weird.
I mean, some people, some people describe that as a really like a slightly uncomfortable.
Yeah. And when you
sort of experience,
when you first go on, you look at the number of profiles on there and you just think, I can't look at all of them. So I need to narrow this search down. But any parameter, any filter just seems so unfair. Suddenly you're thinking, do I want a boy or a girl? And I hit girl. I thought I'd look for a girl, and because I'm a girl, and I like hair and dresses and things. So I looked through the girls and I put in my age range and single, obviously single children because that's what I'd been approved for. Yeah, I got a lot of no response.
Yeah.
And those I did get a response of all had quite a lot of additional needs.
Yeah.
To the point where I took some of my experience with additional needs off my profile, thinking
Right.
maybe that's, what sort of. And I was expressing interest. Nobody expressed interest in me until a week
Right.
after I'd been approved at matching panel. Then I got
Right.
an expression of interest. Like, too late. But yeah, so it was all me, putting out all these things and then gradually sort of increasing. And so where I don't know why, but you have a dream, you have a vision in your head of the child.
Yeah.
And it was a mixed race. I'm white, but I've spent a lot of time in South America. Mixed race girl, Afro-Caribbean girl. And I ended up matched to a white boy. So there you go.
Yeah.
But yeah, I expressed interest. When I first saw this boy's profile, I ignored it. I skimmed past it because I can't spell his name. As a dyslexic, there are certain words that just don't stick.
Right.
You no amount of trying. And his name was one of those. So like, nah. But then during sort of between Christmas and New Year, when there's nothing to do and you're bored, and I was just flicking through and his profile came up again, and yeah, I sort of clicked on it, and there were a few things on reading his profile that made me go, ooh, we've got that in common, we've got this in common. And so I expressed interest, and then heard nothing until about March.
Yeah. I mean, we've not had very many people on the podcast who've sort of described that matching process in sort of that detail. I always wonder, is it difficult to sort of, do you feel like you have to invest in the children that you sort of click yes to?
I didn't. I very much kept in my head about it. I didn't engage my heart, and I don't know whether that was deliberate or just the way it was, but I was very logical of like right age, right level of additional needs, very much, can I cope with that? Yes or no? Can I manage that? Yes or no? But when I opened this little boy's profile, I remember saying to Claire again on the Zoom, I'm like, yeah, he got my heart. Suddenly I felt that heart connection, and I'm like, because of these things, in his profile that we had in common, a couple of the things that, I had never imagined finding in a child in the UK.
Right.
Like I say, I've traveled a lot, so related to my travel. And yeah, I was like, okay, no. And then, yeah, like I say, it was a couple of months before we got anything back. And my social worker actually said that had she been more on the ball, she would have ended the discussion. But thankfully she wasn't. And turned out they had been pursuing another link and that hadn't worked out.
Right.
And so they sent me his CPR. And yeah, there were some additional needs there. Neurodiversity. He has a diagnosis of autism. And I always said from day one, I would never say no to a child purely on the basis of neurodiversity, because let's face it, if I'd have had a birth child, they would have had neurodiversity. So for me, that, obviously there are other learning disabilities and things that can come alongside that. But everything I read, and they were so open with medical reports and everything, that, I know is not a given. But everything I read, I was like, oh, I knew other parents who maybe didn't have the experience of neurodiversity would look at it and go, ooh. And I'm just going, oh, he flushes things down the toilet. Oh, that's cute. The nursery found him playing in the toilet water. But, he's obsessed with water. He's autistic. He doesn't like people. There are people in the play area, in the water play. Why would he play there when there's perfectly good water elsewhere?
In a private space, yeah.
Yeah, to an autistic mind, that makes perfect logical sense.
Perfect sense. So you then matched, and now you're at the point of introductions right now, where
Yes.
we're recording this in the middle of all that. So, what are your reflections so far on matching transitions, getting ready for moving in, all of that kind of stuff? Not matching, moving in.
Yeah, well, that you have that high of, again, unanimous approval at matching panel, and obviously the social workers, family finders say why they think it's a good match. Then the panel chair tells you why they thought it was a good match, and at the end of which I didn't know whether I should be polishing my halo or ironing my Superman cape, because I sounded, I'm like, okay, now I just have to live up to this. So yeah, there's that high of, yes, this is happening, followed quickly by,
this is happening.
What have I
done? Not an uncommon feeling. I'm having a flashback talking to you.
Yeah. And so then a sudden, I've got so much to do. So I sort of immediately went on Facebook Marketplace and overdosed on stairgates. I have stairgates coming out my ears.
Yeah, I totally hear that.
Got 3 in one day off Facebook Marketplace, and then realised I have a very narrow kitchen door. So I ended up buying a new narrow fit one. Because the little boy's, he's a toddler. He's nearly 3. He'll be 3 in November.
Right.
Had a slight meltdown of panic when I was preparing to leave to go and look at car seats with my sister. I don't know why that in particular was a trigger, but it was like,
well, it's it's all a sense of imminence, isn't it? There's a real sense of this is happening, and what has been for you sort of coming up for 3 years worth,
nearly 3 years,
and I'm sure all before that as well. It's happening.
Yeah,
and that must.
And you'll
remember those days.
You're sat there lying in bed, having a cup of tea in the morning, and going, I don't really want to give this up. And then you go, yeah.
That's fair enough. It's fair enough.
So yeah, it's that up and down, and I'd always said, given his autism, I wanted longer introductions. Wasn't aware of this new research in the University of East Anglia model, which a lot of agencies are going for now, which is a series of play dates, getting to know your play dates before you start the traditional week there, week here, and also is then followed up by organised visits from the foster carer as well. So it's like gone, but not really. It's not the end of that relationship. So
which seems to someone who's done it the other way, it feels like a much more compassionate.
Yeah, it's kind of like
protracted, but more compassionate.
You kind of go, and it took research to realise this.
Yeah.
But so I was pleased when they said, that's the way it was going to go. So we had our first play date on Saturday last week. Second one was supposed to be this week, but because of things in the foster carer's life, it's been cancelled. So we've got a planning meeting on Tuesday. So hopefully we'll figure it all out then.
So you are right bang in the middle. Tell me a little bit. So that first date must have been, your heart must have been bursting out of your chest, was it, beforehand?
Well, we'd had a bump into. They did arrange a bump
Right.
into nursery observation and bump into so that I could see his additional needs in the flesh, if you
Yeah.
like. Um, but I was told categorically you cannot interact with the child. And anybody who knows me knows that I interact with every child I meet, even randomly in a shop. So I was very much kind of like, do not interact, do not interact. So there was no in sort of love at first sight, butterflies and rainbows, which I know is the exception rather than the rule. You know, most people don't
Yeah.
feel that on the first visit. But I was still very much in my head on that, going, can I cope with this? So when I went down for the first official play date last weekend, it was very unreal. It's almost like I didn't feel anything about it. I was just like, okay, I'm on the train, I'm going, because they're not local, they are quite a way
Yeah.
away. But I knocked on the door and I could hear him screaming. And then like foster care opens the door with wrangling a child in her arms. And I'm like, okay, that's a nice welcome. But I then gave him, there'd been some miscommunication, so I actually took the transition toy with me and book. And I gave him the toy, which is a little llama from Aldi. Go to Aldi, folks, it's cheaper than Build-A-Bear.
Excellent.
With a little recordable
Top
heart
tip.
in that had my voice singing very cheesily. And I took it out the bag and his face just lit up. And so I squeezed it and he ran off to show his foster care. And then he came back and held it out so I could squeeze it again. And this happened quite a lot. And I'm like, this is me singing cheesily and I'm listening to it over and over again. And he started humming along to it as well. So, and then went to the park. So as kind of time went on, you know, I think I did at that point start falling for him. So, yeah. Love at second
Wow.
sight.
Yeah, and I mean, it feels like I mean, it is literally happening as we talk. We'll have to get you back on the podcast in a year or two, and you can tell us how
it's gone, being
how that developed.
single parenting an autistic child.
Yeah. What are your reflections on the process of approving adoptive parents and the kind of the rigor of that process?
I think there are flaws in that one person's opinion can make or break an approval. And I don't think that's right. And I don't think that should be the case. And when things go wrong, I think there needs to be more of an exploration of that, where the social worker involved isn't present.
Right.
You know, maybe a few sessions with another social worker to see whether they have the same impression of this prospective adopter or something like that. I don't know, but there needs to be something more, because so often in the stories I've heard since, from previous and things that have happened since, it's often come down to that individual social worker.
Yeah.
And so I think there does need to be more. And I did actually ask for my file and discovered that those first two things I mentioned, the thing with the budget and me asking why I wasn't getting contact, that was written up by the first social worker in such a way that implied that I was needy and had anxiety issues.
So it set the tone.
So the second social worker
for everything.
Yeah. And I also read in there the stuff that she had sent, the description of me she had sent to the agency medical advisor. And to be fair, had I not known me and read that, I would have recommended that I got an ADHD assessment. Unfortunately, it wasn't true. It was quite stereotypical of a little boy with ADHD.
Right.
And a adult presentation is very different, and a female presentation is very different. But yeah, I kind of realized then that it wasn't it was almost like a confirmation bias on her side.
Yeah.
And she'd come from children's social work, so maybe that was the only knowledge she had of ADHD.
Yeah. But I guess still, from your point of view, it's nice to be able to then make sense of that decision rather than sort of,
yeah.
Not that you're happy with it, but you can certainly say, all right, well, that's how it unfolded a certain way.
Yeah. My friend said, when I said I got the file, my friend was like, do you really want to open that wound? Because this was after I'd been matched,
right?
That I got the file through. Well, I think it was in the run up to matching panel. And I was like, it was almost like squeezing a spot. You know, it wasn't pleasant, but I felt better for afterwards.
Yeah.
You know, because I had the answer, because I have since been diagnosed with ADHD. And after being approved, it was January this year, I got my diagnosis. And I now know that it wasn't direct discrimination, disability discrimination. It wasn't the ADHD. Really, that was the problem.
Right.
That was what was sort of hooked on by her and the manager. But her problem with me wasn't that I was ADHD. So, yeah. But going back to that, you know, more communication in that stage 1. You know, don't expect to hear from me. You know, everything we do in this stage is behind the scenes. We'll only contact you if you need something, if we need something from you. But feel free, if you want to check on the process, to give us a ring. You know?
Yeah.
Because unless you're tapped into the adoption community as a prospective adopter, you don't know what's normal.
Yeah. Very few people do. And I sort of recall similar experiences for ourselves, you know, myself and my wife, that we just took it as it was because that's what we thought it was. But with reflecting on it now, I see that where there was missteps but you don't know. If you don't know, you don't know. You can't know what you don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know most prospective adopters listening to the podcast are already probably quite involved in the adoption community. Yeah. But, you know, I would certainly recommend that people tap into that. And whenever I hear somebody says to me, oh, my friend's thinking of adopting, I'm like, right, do this, do that, get on this group, get on that group, go to the Adoption UK. Because I know somebody I spoke to years ago who said that they'd been turned down for adopting because they had a Staffordshire Bull Terrier. And of course, now I know that that is completely ridiculous.
Yes.
And if I were to meet them today, I'd be like, don't accept that. You know, you don't have to go with your local authority. Go to somebody else, you know.
Yeah.
And I just yesterday heard that a lady who after me went through a similar experience has just been given a panel date, having gone back and started with another agency. And that makes me so happy.
Yeah, and that's because good news.
I know her experience was worse than mine first time round. And so we've talked a lot and worked through that to get her to this point.
Yeah.
And she also, you know, she's bought some toys. You know, it's like that hope is rising in her.
Significant milestone.
So, yeah.
Petra, thank you so much for sharing your story. And it's not an easy story to recount, and it's, you know, it's still very, very recent. And so I really appreciate your honesty and your openness. Thank you so much for your time, and wish you give you best wishes and good luck and God bless and whatever in between for the next few weeks, months and years.
Thank you.